So I'm happy to join in, if I may. Yeah, then I will start my presentation. First of all, many thanks for the invitation, the kind invitation, and as well the excellent preparation of this webinar. I'm very pleased to join from my side, and I have prepared some material to illustrate what I'm talking about. So my name is Carsten Benz. I'm going to talk about the topic of the webinar, which is separation between regulator and ANSP in the aviation industry. I'll give a little bit of background. I will introduce some of the solutions have been found, especially in Europe. And I'm also happy to answer your questions if there are any. Would you be so kind to give me a signal whether I can be heard properly? Any signals, so everybody's fine with me understanding what I'm saying?
Yes, Professor, you are loud and clear. Albert Taylor here can hear you clearly.
Very good. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's good. Excellent. So I'm happy to continue with my presentation. And would like to start with some short introduction of myself. My name is Carsten Benz. I call myself as an expert in aviation and aerospace industry. Present, I work as a professor in air traffic management at Worms University. Me personally, I live with my family in Wiesbaden, which is close to Frankfurt in Germany. And Worms University is a little bit south, 60 kilometers south of Frankfurt, and it's a wonderful place to be. And I'm happy to be a professor in air traffic management. I will also work as a chairperson of the supervisory board for Dronic. Dronic is a company who invests into drone technology in the so-called UTM, not ATM, but UTM. Most of you will have heard about this, and so it's also an interesting area to work on in terms of advanced air mobility. I'm a member of the board of advisors for the German ANSP, the Deutsche Flugsicherung GmbH, which is DFS, covering the airspace above Germany, obviously. And in the past, I have had the chance and the opportunity and the privilege to work more than 25 years in the aviation industry, which means I worked the last years as an independent advisor on sustainability, especially aviation fuel. I've worked as a senior advisor in aerospace for AlixPartner, which is a US-based consulting company. And I've been more than 25 years with Lufthansa Group in various functions and various capacities. I was a member of the board of Austrian Airlines in Vienna. I was head of Europe, head of sales and services in Europe. So I covered a broad variety in our industry. And I'm happy to be here and to give you some insights into the topic. The agenda, if I may, I'm pleased to have taken up some of the points. Is ATM the state of the art and the challenges? Excuse me for misspelling. State of the art and challenges. The concepts and theories of separation, some key attributes necessary for a successful separation once government has decided to do so, and then the transformation journey of states and ANSPs. And there are various factors and aspects to be considered and regarded, and I will guide you through that. If you have a question, any questions, please do not hesitate to ask the questions in the Q&A section. First of all, sovereignty is a fundamental principle of international aviation. Whenever you think about separation, you have to think about sovereignty as its starting point. In Article 1 of the Chicago Convention, it's clearly said the state has complete and exclusive sovereignty of the airspace above its territory. So sovereignty means not only ownership of airspace, but also the exclusive competence to exercise legislative, administrative, and judicial powers within the airspace. And the Article 28 of the Chicago Convention says, yes, whenever a state makes a choice about how to provide facilities and services for air navigation, these facilities and services must comply with ICAO. I will come back to that one as well, because ICAO sometimes gives clear instructions what to do and what not to do. But in our case, when it comes to separation, there is something to be added. First of all, I would talk about the situation of the industry. There's an industry structure, which means ANSPs are in most cases in a monopoly status with a very weak or poor economic regulation and mostly under governmental control, which is the current infrastructure. I'm not judging. In some cases, there is some work to do, but in many cases, there is a weak incentive to improve performance. There is a resistance aspect of ANSPs rather than the needs of the airline customers. I come from an airline. I've worked within the Lufthansa Group for many years, and we always focused on the customers. And the customers for ANSPs should be airlines, the airspace users, maybe also military aviation, maybe also this air taxi, advanced air mobility customers. But it's always about to create, first of all, without any doubt, safety, but then also efficiency, capacity, and all other stuff. The underperformance of the ATM industry is an ongoing topic in Europe, with high prices, fragmented airspace, and also a lack of transparency. I've worked on the airline side. I've looked into air navigation service providers, how they charge flights above Europe, across Europe, from airport to airport. And we found out that also a topic to be thought of is the slow adoption to new technologies or new technologies. The problems encountered in the provision of ANS by traditional governmental institutions. First and foremost is the capital needs of an air navigation service or air navigation service provider, and governmental institutions have had difficulties in keeping pace because there is rapidly growing air traffic. There is no sign that air traffic is going to stop its growth over the years. There are so many untapped potentials still, and especially in Africa as well, also in Asia. And everybody, without any discussion, priority number one is safety. So keeping up with rapid growth, keeping up with the high levels of safety standards, there is a strong need for capital to fund the air navigation service providers, and governmental institutions sometimes fail or struggle because they have restricted abilities to borrow money in capital markets to finance these infrastructure improvements. And also governmental institutions are subject to governmental procurement and policies, how to make a decision. That means this imposes bureaucratic inefficiency into a field where, yes, safety is at first place, but safety is also at top place for airlines and airports as well. And there are far more examples where privatization had no risk on safety, but definitely on the efficiency. And the governmental institutions are subject to civil service labor costs, and it means there is no discipline by market forces. So at the end of the day, it's a cost impact, which has a tendency to grow and grow and grow. When it comes to the future of the aviation industry, there was a starting point with the liberalization of air transport. And this has been a success story. There is competition between airlines, and competition between airlines has brought down definitely airfares and also gains in economic welfare to nations and states. Yes, one might say it's not perfect. It's not perfect. There is still some limits. There is so-called open skies, Europe to the US, but nevertheless, cross-border consolidation and also grandfather rights might also have a negative impact on the situation in the market. So liberalization has started last century but it is still way to go. But compared to airlines, air traffic control is one of the most and heavily regulated industries. 2 ways out, displayed here on my slide with 2 arrows. One is separation of air navigation service provision and corporatization, which means there is an entity operating independent of the government. On the other side, there is competition. Competition means for selected ATM services, there might be a need for competition. And I'm very much familiar with the German air navigation service provider, the Deutsche Flugsicherung, and they are very, very proud of themselves. And I can imagine all over the world, there are teams of ANSPs which have also capacities and capabilities which might be very helpful to other countries and other nations as well. Coming back to the Chicago Convention, states are free to choose their organizational structure, and the ICAO says nothing but there is no best option. And that means the best option will vary from case to case. So ICAO has taken a neutral position on separation, which is something I would say it's not normal. Normally, ICAO is very clear about what to do and has standard procedures and practices. And they also want to say, guys, this could be the best way for any kind of air services. When it comes to governance, or the other way around, when it comes to separation, corporatization, privatization of ATM, there are issues. Let's be honest, there are issues about governance. The question is, how are ownership and control addressed? What does the appointment process mean? Yeah? Who is accountable? What about transparency of activities, processes, technologies, but also charges? Is there flexibility in the ANSP about through fees and access to capital markets, but also flexibility when it comes to a volatile development of markets? We've seen all over the world, we have seen a tremendous downturn in air traffic by COVID and the implication by the pandemic crisis. But in Europe, also another area, and the volatility of air traffic and airspace users flying or not flying has increased. So flexibility has become an even bigger issue to be clarified before any separation steps have to be taken. What does it mean if separated entities speak to government bodies? How can government bodies oversee safety and economic regulation? What is the price? What is the service control? And what are the processes, judicial processes in regards to appeal from free determinations and also about third-party reliability? One has to think also about functional and organizational separation. Functional separation is clearly an ATM is allocated to a different unit within the same entity. So promoted by the ANSP is managed separately, but there are also control mechanisms behind it. On the other side, there is organizational separation. So totally legally, financially independent unit providing the air traffic control service. The management of the ANSP takes autonomous decision and has the legal accountability. And organizational separation is also known as the structural separation. I have displayed on the lower bottom of the lower part of the slide, you see the characteristics. Just to mention one, it means own budget, own staff, expertise should be available, roles and responsibilities should be clearly defined, and the head of the ANSPs is accountable. And organizational separation, as already explained, is a little step further, which means same characteristics, but additionally, there is independency, and the management is empowered to enter into international contracts. So what are the benefits of functional separation? What is the beauty of having a separated entity, either functional or organizational? I mean, first of all, a functional separation gives the states a clear role, a focus on their role as regulator. It also clarifies other aspects, ownership of airspace regulation, supervision. It improves safety due to independence and transparent oversight. And it reduces taxpayers' burden by creation of a separate budget. Functional separation, an entity, a different unit with a different budget. When it comes to organizational separation, there are even more benefits out of that. Same benefits as functional separation, but additionally, financial risk of the states are limited. Additional reduction of taxpayers' burden by removing these air navigation service costs out of the public budget. Vertical cooperation models to achieve regional synergies are possible. Work together with airlines, airports, and other partners in the ecosystem of aviation, and also the possibility to open ANSP market, or the air navigation service market, which has been taking place in Europe, where tower control is a task which is not only allowed to the national air navigation service provider, but it's also went out in a public process where the Deutsche Flugsicherung have had applied for London Gatwick tower operation, as well as Edinburgh in Scotland tower operation. So this is some of these beauties and benefits of the organizational separation. When it comes to regulation, service provision, oversight, you need a clear focus: regulatory function, normative framework, and empowerment. There's oversight, looking after service provision complies with regulation. And there is one unit, which is the service delivery unit, is responding flexibly to customers' needs. When it comes to the actual outcome, to my knowledge, more than 80 nations have shifted the responsibility for air traffic control models out there. It starts with a government department where there is, so to speak, not that much of separation, but then it goes into government agencies, state enterprise, corporatized entities, and privatized, even partly or fully privatized company. And Canada and Switzerland, also the United Kingdom, these countries are the leading countries, those with a good role model and also good experience. Clear to everybody, safety is priority number one. But secondly, there is far more flexibility to use the funding and also to build up a modernized infrastructure. And I've written down some of the examples. Some of these countries are moving on. Ireland has just recently also privatized its air navigation services. So there is a lot of movement ongoing, whereas on the other side, you see France still there is a government department. USA, it's a government agency. So these countries have also good reasons to keep, so to speak, a different understanding or different meaning of the separation. Once you decided to do the separation, you have to run to a process of separation. And there are some remarks on the next 3 slides about what to do and what to keep an eye on. First of all, define separation between regulatory and service provision function. Decide whether you want to choose functional or organizational separation with clear target. Accountability, performance, resources, responsibility have to be clearly stated and in a way separated. Secondly, you have to define the objectives for the service providers. The objectives, what is the service provider need to be doing? Yeah? So the reasons for separating the functions will help to determine the model. Yeah? If you want to have cost reduction, you want to have safety improvement, you want to remove the funding for the ANSP to outside of the government budget. There is also a clear need for define and state and communicate these objectives, because the transition period might take a time, and if it's not clear why this all is happening, you end up in some hopefully not too heavy turmoils. And the last one, the third one, is the clear definition and understanding of roles and responsibilities. Yeah? So saying these have to be defined, published, and agreed, and have to be clearly stated and fully transparent. Nevertheless, publication of these roles and responsibilities, the Ministry of Transportation is still in charge. So that's the basic understanding. On the next slide, you see the key attributes when it goes into the further steps. The government structures need some clarification. The government structures, government is taking place, the management board of the ANSPs will oversee the health of the organization, ensuring a proper service delivery, and also will approve some investment decisions. Yeah? So they should be clearly have a clear knowledge about their job to do. And the next step is clearly defined coordination processes where there is dialogue. Separation doesn't mean there's a termination of dialogue. There are interactions, and independence doesn't mean no communication. Yeah, it needs approval processes, oversight processes of service provision, and so on and so forth. And the last one on this slide is the separation of budgetary freedom. So there is access to capital market, and the ANSP can generate its own funds. Empowerment of service provider management, and at the end of the day, also the accountability of management have to be named. What is empowerment? Yes, there is a level of empowerment to be synchronized with the objectives. So what kind of contracts the management of the ANSP is allowed to sign? What can they do in setting salaries? Are they allowed and supposed to join alliances? And last but not least, the accountability of management has to be stated. The management is responsible for the safety. And this is the last two slides, if I may, the last two slides of my presentation. There's a journey. The journey is ongoing. It's not easy. The separation of regulation and service provision has to be initiated by the state. And once these functions are separated, the provider of the service share the responsibility for an overall functional ATM system. So it's a journey from left to right, and the journey is also clearly that during these journey, states and ANSPs have to be travel companions. It's not one or the other. It's a joint journey. I took a chance to give you a bit more insights in what are the steps, what is the journey. It goes from self-regulation into functional separation. It goes towards domestic efficiency, and then maybe also continuing towards regional and global efficiency. The key areas I mentioned here, in respect of my colleague Albert Taylor, I'm closing my presentation at this point in time with a big thank you, and thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, please do not hesitate.
We want to take few couple of questions. The first question that we have now is, what funding mechanisms are most appropriate for a newly established ANS entity in terms of fees and charges for service provision only or state sanctioned levies? That is the first question.
Is it
Prophet, we want to take that one before we go to the second question.
Yeah, I can take that one. By defining the airspace users as the customer of the ANSPs, it's clear that the whole system has to be funded by charge, released from the government in a way, and also released from tax funding and public budgets. And public budgets, it means that charges will play a major role. So charges should be imposed, and charges will also lead to an understanding what air traffic control is. Customers will have to pay for it, but they also, if the process is transparent, will understand what they pay for, and both parties can cooperate directly to improve the situation in terms of gaining more efficiency. And efficiency is a topic. I mean, talking about safety is one thing, but secondly is there's growing traffic, and growing traffic has to be covered by airspace usage as well. So there is a strong need for the two parties, airlines and air traffic control, but also airports have to work closely together.
Thank you very much, Prof. We want to take the second question. It goes like, is it normal practice for reps of professional bodies be appointed onto the boards?
Yes.
In other words, any guidance for board constitution for a newly formed ANSP?
First of all, it has to be clearly stated what the separation process should look like, and it starts with functional or organizational separation. As soon as it's a functional separation, I would assume that the government entities, the government representatives, will also be part of the management board of the ANSPs. But if it's a clear separation, which is also an organizational separation, there has to be a clear distinction between someone in the government with expertise on ANSP, but the management should be independent, and the board should also be in a way independent. And from the experience in Europe, the board of this ANSPs, there should be airports, airlines, also maybe representatives from the military area. They also can contribute to the development of the ANSP.
Thank you very much, Prof. The third question that we have for you this morning is it a good policy to fund the separated ANSP but by tax rather than industry revenues? I'll take that again. Is that a good policy to fund the separated ANSP by taxes rather than industry revenues?
I mean, first of all, the separation means the unit is independent from the taxpayers' budget. It's independent from public budgets. That means, on the other side, or looking at it the other way around, that means it should be funded by the airspace users, charges which are imposed to those one using the airspace. And these charges should be transparent, most transparent as possible. However, if there is more efficiency and in ANSPs, more flights in the same airspace, then obviously there is a chance for the ANSPs also to generate higher revenues.
Thank you so much, Prof.
You're welcome.
We are most grateful for having you this afternoon. Would want to acknowledge some few attendees before we go to our second speaker for today. Would like to acknowledge Kwesi Mensah from Ghana, Samuel Mugabe, Uganda, Roger Difo, Cameroon, Ahmed Abba Ifatka, AFM, Regional Vice President, West Africa. Would also want to acknowledge Dr. Uche Victor Elias, Regional Technical Coordinator, ANS, Bagasu. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Our second speaker for today is an expert who has had a distinguished career in the aviation industry for over 40 years with a dedication, passion, and professionalism. He is foremost an air traffic controller, rose through the ranks to become the Director of Air Traffic Services, Ghana Civil Aviation Authority, from 2007 to 2014. He also served in the following capacities: a FATCA Executive Board member, Executive Vice President, Africa and Middle East from 1999 to 2007, Section Head of International Training and Manager, International Relations and Marketing, Aviation Training Academy, ATNS South Africa, from 2003 to 2006. ICAO Regional Officer, Air Traffic Management, Search and Rescue, WACAF Office, from 2014 to 2021. He is an ICAO Train Air Plus, Air Navigation Service subject matter expert, and is currently the Director of Civil Aviation Training and Innovation Center. He has to his credit many publications, including articles, working papers, and presentation at all levels of aviation meetings, seminars, workshops, and conferences, as well as being a contributing editor to newsletters, bulletins, and journals. He has received many international awards, including Honorary Life Member of United Kingdom, Guide of Air Traffic Control Officers, the IFATCA Scroll of Honor, Albert Taylor Scholarship established by ATNS of South Africa, IFATCA Africa and Middle East Region Certificate of Distinction, ICAO Secretary General's Award of Achievement in 2019, AFI Air Traffic Services Analysis Group, and ASEGNE's highest award, Medal of Honor in 2022. He has also received special awards from Air Traffic Controllers Associations from Morocco, Nigeria, Tanzania, Uganda, and Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. Albert Edu Taylor. Mr. Taylor, we are grateful to have you. Please have the floor.
Thank you, Evelyn, and thanks to the Ghana Air Traffic Controllers Association for organizing this technical web seminar. I am the product of all of you, and I'm pleased to be here to share the occasion with you. And also thanks to Professor Burns for very in-depth analysis of the concept, the history, etc. I associate myself fully with everything that has been said today by him. I was struggling not to try and repeat the things that he has said, but few things will have to be made. So thank you. Maybe I can start. Okay, the topic that was given to me to address, following what Professor has said, is overview of separation of ANSPs and regulations in the AFI region. And to do so, I'll look at 5 areas: the background, defining the purpose and objective for separation, separation models and examples, which has been mentioned by Professor. We'll talk about a few examples in Africa. Look at the challenges and my view of the way forward, and therefore, and final recommendations. I want to state clearly that I'm doing this presentation as a one of the industry practitioners, and not as my role for Rwanda Civil Aviation Training and Innovation Center. So I'm presenting here based on my expertise and experience in this area, and not for or on behalf of Rwanda. Well, so most of the aviation system, including air navigation, started in the colonial areas for almost all the African states, either through the military air force establishments or through trade and commerce from those the colonial era. Come independence, many states took over the responsibilities of providing those services. But as we progress, there were challenges in terms of maintaining the safety, security, capacity, and efficiency requirements when the global economic downturn affected the support that most states were receiving from their former colonial masters. The economies of states were not supporting the industry enough because aviation was considered a luxury for many people, so for many states. And there wasn't enough support financially when they have to compete against the meager resources of many states. So there were a lot of deficiencies in the system, and there was quite a response from international agencies, and FAPA, IATA, ICAO, in response to the shortcomings and deficiencies in the provision of air navigation service. In the aviation, not only air navigation, airports, etc., all encountered challenges, and eventually ICAO has to come in. This was the control center air conditioning for Accra, Ghana, those times. On the left side was the headset that was being used by the Flight Information Center of Accra. And you see in my hand, was my hand holding it. There was wires holding it together. There was sellotape holding it together. And that was a chair and the control Flight Information Center of Accra. So microphone was, so you can see there was a single microphone that everyone was using. And even that one, the engineers were innovative to hold it together with sellotape and wires. And you can see the nice chairs. Today, the same Accra looks like this. Why the pictures were shown those times was that Ghana had become an FAA Category 1 accredited state and received all the accolades. And anytime air traffic controllers raised issues about the challenges that we had, the issue of being FAA Category 1 and the safety requirements was a flag carrier that the deficiencies within were not being addressed. And why? Because we had the CA together with the ANS or service providers, including the airports then. So the CA was not exercising or effectively its oversight role of the provision of the services, and clouded in the glory of AFA Category 1. And so the article was published in the Controller magazine and was calling on ICAO to extend safety oversight to the area of air navigation, because originally the ICAO oversight was annexes 1, 6, 8, and 18, and never addressed the other annexes, such as Annex 11 for air traffic services and Annex 14 for aerodromes. So it was possible that we'll have safety regulation when we are together in terms of the functional separation, not organizational separation, that the regulator looks somewhere as if everything is okay within. the system. This is also in 2016, visiting another state in West Africa. This is the cabinet, the control tower. That was the chair of the controller, the chair for the visitors, other staff in the control room. And that was the controller's chair. You can see there's a hole inside the chair. And that's where the air traffic controller sat to provide his job. Today, I'm told it's improved after I raised an issue on that. And the same way as Ghana's issue, when we raise issues on that, it nearly cost my job though, but subsequently it cost management to address the issue. And we had one of the best area control centers since 2000. For 1999, that is almost a year after the publication, Ghana took the step to give us one of the best control centers, and kudos to management for responding to that. Now, during this period, IFAPA called what is called Annex 19 of deficiencies and shortcomings. At that time, ICAO defined shortcomings of requirements in air navigation, regional navigation plan that were not implemented. So if it's not implemented, it is called a deficiency. But if it's implemented and is not serving the purpose or the required levels of performance, then it was a shortcoming. So IFAPA published a document and was reporting to every APEC shortcomings and deficiencies, and declared a substantial portion of the African airspace as being critically deficient. So the services and the facilities in the most African airspace was classified as critically deficient. In all this, we have both the ANS and the CA together in some cases, or all of them together at the ministry. This caused IATA to hold the first ATS incident analysis meeting in 1998. And IATA introduced what has become known for the younger ones now, the in-flight broadcast procedures, IFBP, the equivalent of TIBA in the Annex 11. Subsequent to that, IATA concerned on behalf of the users, as the professor said, established what they call the ATC enhancement billing system, and was such that they will guarantee the provision of equipment, facilities, including training for air traffic control centers, so that through the charges they can pay in time, or they have to require bank loans to provide the services. Because IATA had to play these roles, because the safety, regulatory, the oversight functions of the state for most states were not effective. That then ICAO at the NAFI-RAN meeting, the 7th Regional Air Navigation Plan meeting in Abuja in May 1997, also took a recommendation requiring all states to establish the CA with legal, management, and financial autonomy, and subsequently extended the ISOP to cover annexes 11 and 14. And on behalf, IFATCA also reported the deficiencies in its and shortcomings in its at ATS meetings, subgroup meetings of APEC, and also in journals. And that solicited ICAO, IFATCA, IFAPA ATS subgroup to work at all levels on this. So this is where we came. We had, in the case of deregulation and liberalization in North America, but we were confronted with shortcomings because the existing structures were not effective, and there was a call by service users for improvement. These ushered in the discussion for the separation, because most of the fundings that were expected from governments were not coming. So the era of separation came, and for very reasons. In most cases, the airports companies or aspect of it were taken from the government payroll, and always it was most of the time it was the ANS as well as the regulatory and oversight functions that were kept together in most cases. In few cases, however, the ANS and the airports were put together, and was a disaster for most of it because the ANS activities, even the engineering systems, NAVICs are not seen. But people passing through the airport see the deficiencies and report to states, and states are quick to address that. So in most cases, when the airports and ANS are put together, ANS still suffer some defects of equal recognition. So this is the advent where we're discussing separation of the regulatory, oversight, and service provision functions. And for me, before a state takes the decision, they should clearly ask some questions. Why do we want to separate the regulatory functions from the service provision functions? They should be clear in answer why they want to do that. What does the state want to achieve by separating those two functions? And then clearly, as also has been mentioned by Professor Burns, define the objectives. Is it about cost reduction? Is it that there's inefficient management? Is it because we wanted to operate like a business-like service? Is it because of funding and investment, lack of it, from which you want to remove that function from government budget lines? They provide productive, prudent management. Those things have to be clearly listed out so that when you take a solution, you are taking a solution to address clearly defined objectives. And as also mentioned, it has to be clearly stated, it has to be published and made clear, and then indicate those performance measures that are required to decide whether you're on the right track or not. Then how does the state effectively separate the regulatory service from the service provision? How are we going to do that? By the establishment of a functional organization or a functional entity, or one with the structure or organizational separation. Air navigation service is monopolistic. Even so is the CA. And therefore, states must make sure that they put in place structures that sort of mitigate this monopolistic environment. Then who represents the state? If you go to South Africa, the CA is not representing the states. It's the Department of Transport. Germany has the same thing. It's not the CA, it's the state, it's the ministry that is representing the state. So if you want to invite somebody for any meeting from South Africa, the letter has to go to the Department of Transport and not the CA. So the CA becomes a service provider. So the state clearly must indicate who represents the state and who provides what services. Then when those questions are there, as been indicated, there must be clear delineation of roles, responsibilities, functions, and accountabilities. And as Professor has said, the Chicago Convention, Article 1, clearly gives the recognition that states recognize that every state has complete sovereignty over the airspace above its territory. And then sovereignty refers to the ownership of airspace to the exclusive competence of states to exercise 1, legislative, 2, administrative, and judicial powers within their national airspace. You realize that at this point, they are not talking about technical in terms of equipment of operations, but those high-level issues that identify the state, give the power, is set by the state. That means the state can delegate the provision of those services in terms of equipment, equipping the industry, etc., to other organizations, either other state or even international supra organization. So it is important to note that the overall responsibility of service provision of any of ANS, even though can be delegated, the state still has responsibility for that provision. And it has to delegate, it looks for who to delegate. So in effect, the management of the operations become delegated when regulatory both the regulator and the service provision functions are done by different entities. The fact that another state or another organization, such as a SECNA, is providing air navigation service does not absolve the state from exercising, for being responsible for the provision of air navigation services. Similarly, when it has to be accountable for what has been done, it is not the service provider. The accountability to ICAO, the international community, still remains with the state. Now, the challenge that has been having many states is the need to differentiate between the role of the technical regulator and the economic regulatory roles. If you don't do this, there's going to be challenges in many, many states. The role of the economic regulator has been subdued or absent or very important because of the way the structure it's been made. South Africa has one of the best arrangements of the economic regulator relating to the technical regulator being the CED. Now, Professor has spoken about it, the two main functions. The functional separation keeps both regulatory and service provision under one unit, under the same entity, of the same board, the same director general. Example is what happens in Ghana, for instance, a functional separation. It's not an organizational separation. The service provider does not have its own board, doesn't have its own director general. It's only one organization. And that's why I'm saying has some positives, but has negatives. As we said, so in the pictures, we're having problems with their issues about training, but the glory of meeting international regulatory requirements seems to subdue whatever challenges that we have. Then organizational separations keep both completely separated and all of them accountable in terms of the high level national responsibility to the Ministry of Transport. So states have to determine the separation mode. When you have clearly identified the objectives and you are clear with what each model has to offer, then a decision will have to be made based on clearly identified objectives, measures, and performance criteria, as Professor also alluded to. And so then decide whichever function. Decide between functional and organizational separation, determine which legal methods. In some cases, in some states, it is a decree from the executive. In many cases, in the civil structure, it is an act of parliament and a law that establishes the separation, whether it has to be functional or has to be organization. But you have to determine the most effective methods of deciding the type of separation. Then in doing that, clearly you have to be sure that accountabilities, performance, resources, responsibilities are properly addressed. In many cases that when there was separation, issues about resources, allocation, issues about liabilities becomes a challenge. In most cases, it depends on who has more influence in the state. They get the lion's share and they just get nothing. It becomes an ongoing battle of challenges for our staff and maybe life insurance, payments, etc., etc. Those are economic burdens that have to be taken care of as you separate, whether as a functional or as an organizational separation. I have put in the table based on the information that I have spread of the various, for each state, the type of module that is being implemented. This is the information I received. If there are changes, you can let us know when they give you the presentation. You realize, for instance, all their sectional states, there is an organizational separation because the CE provides the regulatory functions where the provision of service has been aggregated into a supranational organization of a SECNA of about 18 African states and with France as the center. So that's what we have for NPC in West Africa. Apart from the French countries, you have Gambia, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, who are still functional, but the rest are all organizational separation. So the document will be given to you, so it gives who is functional and who is organization. I'll talk about Nigeria in details going forward from here. We have had challenges in Africa in implementing the separation. One of these is the lack of definition of clear objectives for which separation was required. And as we listed there, is it for business, to operate business-like? Is it to remove it from the government annual budget? Is it to give it efficiency to manage control loans and get things? So those clear things have to be, we have had difficulty in being clear with our definitions of the reasons why we want separation. Ineffective selection and implementation of models. So if we select a functional separation, then you have to make sure that certain things are there. Within the same organization, can you have different budget? If you don't have a different budget and the ANS is generating most of the revenue for which has to be used for the good of the to both the regulator and the service provider, it has its own challenges. And in some cases, the requirements of the state, because the ICAO requirements, international requirements, there's a tendency for the resources to address the regulatory requirements, whereas the ANS, the service providers, who have to bear the challenges, struggle, even though a bulk of the finances may be coming from there. So that has been a challenge. Recently, we have, for instance, a case where, in terms of in Kenya, the last year, 2 years ago, the government was going to add the Kenya Airports Authority to the Kenya Airways, and it was not looking at the solution of the airport, but they wanted, because the Kenya Airways was having problem. And seeing the amount of money they have to pay in terms of landing fees, etc., they rather support it they wanted to support it, and that caused the airport workers to go on strike and etc. until that system has been put on hold. Ineffective application of user fees and charges and taxes. There were times, for instance, that the airport service charge, passenger charge, was being sent directly into the offices of some government. In Ghana, we had a similar situation where, to raise money, they issued, for instance, first class, we paid $200, business class $150, and then economy was about $100. But the issue is that who provides the facilities that the business class passenger or the first class passenger has to use? It is the service provider and not the government. So there has been ineffective application of user fees and charges. In some cases, some fees, charges have been used to support political campaigns, programs, families, etc., when there are serious deficiencies in the provision of the navigation facilities, the training of the people, etc., going forward. As I showed you, for instance, Ghana was a shining example. in terms of regulatory framework. But even then, you see that at one forwarded row, using the HF, and you had such a microphone that was one being used by everyone else there, you could know what it is to manage. But these were the challenges that we had. The Director of Air Traffic Service, Kofi, is there. When during the training, we had a retire, unable to hear us. And Kofi had made a transmission. A retire says he cannot. No, I was in the seat. And then I retire, I say, I cannot read you. How do you read me? He says, I read you like a cow. That's what I retired to us from Lagos to Accra. Kofi was in training, he can bear that out. But we were glorying in the things there, but technically, there were also charges. So the application of fees and charges are not effectively used when we have a functional separation. There's a lack of clarity of responsibility and accountabilities, and then ineffective allocation of resources when they have to separate who gets what, land, etc., etc. Accumulation of money in the investment account, how do we share that? And those who lead this become complicit in most cases. There's a conflict of interest, there's the issue of cooperation. So even though you separate, but we know that there's been huge source of competition, conflict, and lack of cooperation when the issues of separation are not properly addressed for people to know what they are required of them. We may have the best model structure or the functional, but if the people appointed to lead are not doing their work well, it's a huge problem. It's as if you're going to the hospital, getting a medication, thinking that the medication will work, but the medication doesn't work. It doesn't have the efficacy that it has. Major board appointments are fraught with challenges from the board, from the directors, from the executive, etc. People appoint without taking due cognizance of the issues. And in 2000, when I was the EVP, we had a vertical regional meeting in Ethiopia, had opportunity to have a one-on-one meeting with the minister. And then I was asking, Ethiopia was so efficient, etc. He says, yes. Because when it comes to the appointment of the leadership of Ethiopia Airlines, the government does not compromise. They want the best people around to manage. There will be only one person who may have a little political issues to provide a link, but they want it to be efficient. They want the best out there to manage. No wonder Ethiopia Airways is what it is. During the crisis in their civil war, they moved to Kenya and the operation was not affected. During the COVID, it's one airline that transformed itself, making a lot of revenue from cargo, turning the passenger aircraft to cargo in order to sustain, because they have put in place that quality leadership. And so that is why Ethiopia. So Ethiopia always is there, know that they have one of the best. That's what the manager and the minister told me way back 2000, and you have no doubt about it. Second, there's also the challenge of finding directors who have both executive experience as well as technical and professional experience. So you may have technical experts like air traffic controllers, like pilots, like engineers, like etc., etc. But they don't have the skills, executive experience skills, to properly manage separated organizations and also the challenges that come with it. Then we have civil aviation professionals who, because they are for long-term technical experts, the system has not established an effective way of provide management development training. Many people go to universities, etc. But if you go and do human, as an air traffic controller, go and do HR, you come and sit and you don't have an opportunity to practice. What skills do you develop? So the system does not have a place of developing leaders. So the CEOs that are appointed also from other places to come, they may have the business understanding, but they lack the understanding of the aviation. And many a time, government appoint people from the military or pilots. They may be efficient pilots, they may be efficient military people. The Chicago Convention talks about civil. So the development of the military is different. And they have all the skills, most of them, but how to assimilate the civil requirements of the aviation industry becomes a challenge. It's not that some of them are very smart. Military, most of my best friends are military. You can learn a lot from them. But the transition from that military to civil becomes a challenge. And there are some people who believe because the pilot is a captain, he knows everything. And so government tends to appoint pilots to lead most of the civil aviation. You can do a challenge in Africa, and you'll find that about 80 to 90% of the leaders either are pilots or military for most of the countries there. They have skills, they have knowledge, etc., but we have not developed on the transition from either military. You can have a pilot, etc., on the 747 or A380. It doesn't become an effective manager of a civil aviation organization as a regulator or as an ANS provider. This is one of the problems we confront in Africa. Then some governments' appointments are mostly based on allegiances rather than competence and proven expertise in Africa. So we need to take these challenges going forward as we try to find solutions in the separation. I want to give example of my favorite country in Africa, Nigeria. The minister called me Nigerian. He says a Nigerian born in Ghana. And I have reasons to be passionate about Nigeria. One, they have the most populous country in Africa. Two, it is the biggest economy in Africa. Three, in terms of knowledge, PhDs, etc. in Africa, no state comes closer to them. They are passionate to get knowledge and etc. So and when they get the momentum to move on any area, they move and transform the whole region. So if there are any Nigerians here, pardon me for wanting to use Nigeria's example. It's not a negative thing, but also that people can learn from the positive as well as the challenges that we have going forward. You can see way back in 1976, they were the first to try to separate the service from the direct control of the government when the Nigeria Airports Authority was established with statutory responsibility for maintain operations of all the airports. That time, Ghana was not, and many African countries have not even thought about coming from the government. They took that initiative first, right back in 1976. They experimented it, and they realized that it was not right. Then in 1991, the Federal Civil Aviation Authority was created and then merged with the Nigeria Airports Authority. So now they're talking about the CA, they're talking about the Airports Authority. Nobody is talking about the Air Navigation Service Provision. After 4 years, they had the Federal Civil Aviation Authority of Nigeria that became FAN. And the regulatory unit of the CA was moved to the ministry as well, Directorate for Safety Regulation Monitoring. So again, Nigeria was trying to reinvent itself. Then, as things were, they found that it didn't work. And in fact, the most pathetic years for the ANSP was when they and FAN were together, because everybody sees the problem with the airport. Nigeria is huge, has several airports. And so taking care of the ANS became a major challenge there. Then by 1999, they were not happy with it again. Then they created now three separate entities: with the Nigeria Civil Aviation Authority, NAMA, Nigeria Space Management Agency, were separated in 1999. And that arrangement does not have full autonomy. And so for anybody to travel to a meeting or for training, they have to take approval from the ministry. That means they were not given the full autonomy to operate. So you can see Nigeria is trying to reinvent, trying to improve. Why? Because right from the beginning, clearly we didn't identify the objectives why we're looking for the separation and what were the appropriate solutions. So we're responding to the needs of the time, and we had several changes. But thankfully, you're getting there. 2022, there was a new act that gives more autonomy and empowerment to the DGNC, and I do hope that it improves going forward. And at one point, Nigeria appointed a pilot for almost every position, and that had a challenge. And as I said, that the pilots are good, etc. The DG they have here now is very efficient, etc. But not every pilot is an efficient. So they appointed many of them. I don't think all of them, their performance met the requirement that is anticipated of them. To the question that was said, the air navigation service provider raised revenue from overflight fees, etc., etc. In addition to that, Nigeria started with a 5% ticket tax initially for NC and some few, but now they have expanded it. When it was started, I think NCA was having 70% of it, but we now look at it. So they take 50% from each ticket sale in order to provide for some special services. Senegal takes 2,500 CFA, that's about $500 for each sale also, and that is the main revenue in addition to licensing, approvals, etc., done by the CE. Now, so going back to Nigeria, the 5% collected on the ticket has been spread so that major agencies are provided for. So as of now, 56% of that amount goes to the CE. 22% goes to the Nigeria Space Management Agency. 9% go to Nigeria Meteorological Agency, and 7% go to Nigeria College of Aviation Technology. 6% go into the Accident Investigation Bureau. And I've raised issue about the search and rescue not being provided for in this arrangement. And so before we go and talk about accident investigation, there must be the research and the rescue. And so I urge my colleagues in Nigeria to look at that area of search and rescue because the amount there is huge. I left the last accident search and rescue in Ghana when the aircraft fell in the ocean in 2014. Right at the beginning, at the end, we spent how much? $11.4 million, the city equivalent estimate. So it's a huge budget. When Malaysia 370 crashed, right from go, the Australian government put $60 million as a start. And so please, we need you're doing very well, but let's turn and look at the area of search and rescue. So to the question of those who ask revenue, is there. Ghana has similar, they call it safety charge, etc. But the good thing, Nigeria has clearly established how they're going to share it. And Ghana has major problem between them and meteorology as to who should fund it and how it should be funded. The examples for you to learn going forward. So that brings us to where we are in the future. And these are my view. In 2008, I wrote a paper called The Functional Approach in Management of the Airspace. And these are some of the issues. If the airspace is a resource for the state, just as its land and water resources, then how does the state also benefit from its air, from the air, which is the airspace? Just as you cannot take taxes from the water and the land every time and give it to the air. What does the government, if we're a government or if we're a state, what is our benefit? Since the airspace is also a resource. Should the airspace be considered as a security threat, as an industry, enabler of businesses, or what? Can a state benefit from royalties? From the land, we get royalties when we give the land for mining, etc. And the fishes, we give fishing rights and we take money from it. How can the state also benefit from the air as its resources? How do we address the monopoly of the ANS provision and the need for consumer protection? I said that the economic regulator is key. I don't know the role Nigeria the economic regulator played in the case of Nigeria in determining who gets what. On what basis do we determine 56% for NCA? NCA has huge responsibility. NAMA has to buy equipment, etc. What is it? So if there was economic regulator, and between them and technical regulator, there have to be a balance to make sure that we get appropriate price or fees for the services that are rendered. Again, with my on future, can the dynamics of sovereignty and security issues of the state's airspace be maintained if the airspace become a commercial resource? Can a state or should a state earn revenue from its airspace as it does for land and water? Should the airspace and ATM provision be treated as a business or what? These questions and many more should inform a state's strategic approach, policy formulation, decision, and management strategies as to what form of separation a state wants to take going forward. If you don't have a vision of where you're going, the decisions you make here may not carry you into the future. And this is something that I urge Professor Benz and others to, critical thinkers, to address our minds on. Finally, getting to the end, so the state should determine its objective performance measures for separation, select the best model, and based on to meet its decisions. State should decide if ANSC will be an entity of its own or continue to be a supporter of other functions. And states should ensure that adequate legal management financial autonomy as NCA Nigeria has evolved into. Ghana, when they want to travel, is the decision of the DG, and that's it. Should states ensure the delineation, states should ensure clear delineation of roles, responsibilities, function, accountabilities, and states should ensure competent and experienced persons are appointed to the board. In Angola, I read most of the time they have, since I see my friend Abilio son, and the rest from Abilio, Dulce, Bernardo is there. There was always been somebody from the industry. But the experience that we have most of the time, they bring people outside to head this institution, and there's very little upward elevation of the people who are in there because we have been glued to the technical and the professional areas, and there has not been proper management development. So we should ensure, states should ensure that competent people are appointed. Finally, states should ensure adequate resources are made available to the regulator as well as providers. States should provide opportunity for technical operational people to develop their management skills. States should provide an environment for better collaboration between the military and civil personnel. If the military leaders are going to be appointed continuously as heads of these organizations, there must be that environment, that the collaboration between the civil one brings understanding so that when they are playing their roles on the board or etc. executive, they can be effective. So it's to ensure effective role economic regulator. And finally, states should ensure they implement effective successive planning and development programs. Without these, the model Oh, yeah, back to you. I yield back to you.
Well, Mr. Taylor, thank you so much for the insightful education we've had this morning. In the meantime, we want to acknowledge Professor Carsten Benz. He would want to attend to some few engagements. On behalf of GATCA, thank you so much. We are most grateful for having you. We can't thank you enough for taking time off your busy schedules to educate us on this important subject. We say thank you, and we hope that your doors are open and we'll get back to you again for our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All the best. Take care.
Right. At this moment, we want to acknowledge some few attendees that have joined us for this important conversation. We have Lami Faye, that is ATC and SAR, Gambia. We have Melva. Melva, I see you. We have Cosmas Jimson from Malawi. Maureen Isika, Senior Air Traffic Controller Officer from Kenya. Maureen, thanks. We have Engineer Conrad. Thank you. Benjamin Adipa, ATC Ghana. We have Macaulay Onyenika from Nigeria. We are grateful for having you all. Would entreat that you stay with us. We have a couple of questions. Our first question: should every state limit itself to the two types of separation, that is a functional and organizational, or it can pursue other options that may work? Mr. Taylor, over to you.
The states have absolute rights over their legislative, about the administrative functions. So whatever they seem right, they can do. There's no limitation to what they can do. But is there any other ones? The other options, as we had them all with the CE, and if we don't want to remain with the government, there have been some few cases at one point in terms of UK nuts. For instance, the airline has a stake in UK nuts, so they provide influence. In the case of Fiji, initially in the 90s, when they decided to come out of the civil service structure, they gave the workers opportunity to do, and they formed an organization by the workers. They bid and they won the bid. However, when they took over responsibilities, now if Kofi wants to tell Amaku to do A, he said, but we are colleagues. They forget that they've been given, Kofi will be given executive responsibility. If Dr. Victor Oche has to decide among it. So the system of management by the workers didn't work in Fiji. Eventually, they have to abort that. So states have the right, but as I said, clearly, you have to define the objectives. Answer those questions. What do you want to achieve? And what are the measures? So I think that before you take a decision on what to do, you should be noting that whatever decision that you make will address the gaps you have identified to address. So the two are the prominent ones that are available.
Very well. We move on to the second question. What do you recommend to build the management capacity of the technical and operational staff? I'll take that again. What do you recommend to build the management capacity of the technical and operational staff. Over to you, sir.
Okay, there are HR experts who are adept in doing this. I remember we brought people from Sweden, and they have some way of determining who could be a good leader, who could do what. In the same way, we brought Dr. Parker from South Africa, and you know that they have the way of determining who could be a good area control approacher. So they are experts in determining what to do. It isn't everybody who is a leader. People, just as a competent engineer doesn't become a competent trainer, a competent air traffic controller doesn't become a competent trainer. So do we have a very competent technical and operational staff who may not necessarily be have the management capacity, because you have to commit to development of those skills there. So first of all, in terms of educational requirement, it should be clear. Two, there must be a roadmap. When I was the EVP, it was the one reason that we noted that as we were fighting for separation, we said that we didn't want a situation that the time separation came, we, the professionals in the industry, will not have a stake. And that's why I promoted people should go improve their education, go to the university, get the degrees, etc. Those who are within to improve and then change the entry qualification to the graduate entry, because it's the measure of that level. So there must be an educational program. Then there must be an opportunity to be attached to it. They can be attached to certain areas of the airline industry or airport industry, and vice versa. In the time past, we used to have for each airport who was a manager. And then one of the things we expanded in terms of Ghana when I was there to have the ATM, regional COF, what they expanded, etc., is to create departments that people go and develop those skills. So you need education, you need a plan that people will practice those skills and be supported. There must be a fund for those who have to be supported doing that, and must be done critically by the organization. I wanted to, so that I was to give instruction to my supervisors, never be allowed when I'm on duty to go. So if the industry does not, the organization doesn't get that philosophy to support, it will be difficult. Two, the military, we in the military are in the same boat. They have very good programs at where there's a military academy of management and leadership skills development. We should use them and use that opportunity just as we provide them opportunity. They want opportunity here, we also should look for opportunities there. So there must be education, there must be opportunity to practice skills, to attach to different organizations, to go and learn some skills. I went to some place, I had people were sent from Italy, they were in Seychelles to work in the hotels. Why? They wanted them to understand how to relate to people. And then how to go to food, beverage, etc. They had nothing to do. These are people who have finished their degrees, but they needed to go and do that. So there must be a dedicated program in order to help people acquire the skills. You will have the certificates, but if you don't have the skills, they are not enough. And then there must be fund to support the development of future leaders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Taylor. Our third question, is there any country in the AFRI region you know that has seen a successful functional or organizational separation?
It depends on how you want to define success. Oh yeah, are you thrown? It depends on how you want to define success. Because if if you want to ask my preference, I'll recommend organizational separation. That should be what it is there. So in the event that you should rather be find good reasons why you don't want to do so. But when the floor is open for others, those who are to share their experience, you will see the challenges and you see how Nigeria has proceeded and reached a place where they've now settled organizational separation. So the other challenge we've had is when the industry is so small. If you take this, for instance, the size of Gambia, and then look at the size, it may be a challenge for them to do so. But my recommendation, if it is possible, to have a functional. South Africa is one of the best examples that is available. The airport is separate, the ANS is separate, the CA itself is separate and also accounts just like ANS to the ministry directly. And then they have an independent economic regulator. The weather services is also separate. And the example you have in Nigeria, all of them, METS, etc., all of them separated and funding provisions making for them is the best. So if you want my preference, I've seen the good example in South Africa. I've seen the good example in Nigeria, even though it's now evolving to that level of perfection that near perfection that we expect. They are the best examples I can point out to. The sectional arrangement also gives the independence to a sectional to manage, or I haven't done any audit to make sure that in terms of comparison, they are one of the best in the world. But they have arrangement as a functional separation, but I haven't assessed the performance of them individually.
Very well. Our fourth question, Mr. Taylor, with the economic and funding challenges in Africa, do you think separating ANSPs from regulators is an imperative to success?
It is a means and not an end. There. But if you don't get the right people there, it's as I said, you are going to hospital and give you a medication that is not addressing your sickness. So the finance, if you have good leadership, they will mobilize the resources. Because the DOC 9082 and the 9161 on air navigation fund financing provides what is required to do so. And at times, it's not the money that is not there. It is what is used. We have case in Tanzania years ago when they had to buy a radar of how much, and then they spent 40 million. The UK Parliament fought against it because they thought that 40 million for those radar equipment was not justified. And apparently, apart from what was required by the ANS, there was other national things that were captured in for. So that's just the government must be clear what they want. The leadership, getting the right people there is also key. If you have the proper intent and have the right people there, there are structures there that no one should be struggling from financial challenges. If there are no enough money and the government has to provide safety, then the government has to provide it in the funding in its budget, because they ultimately remain responsible for the provision of service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. The fifth question, I think it's in relation to the one you just answered. It goes like, considering funding and traffic volume in Africa, is separation the way to go? Is it urgent? Is it a priority?
If if what is existing, keeping them together, you can indicate that it's meeting the objective in terms of safety, capacity, and efficiency. And then there is no other source of funding, then you better keep it together, provided the mitigation measures are put in place so that we don't have the case of when we're waving a flag of FA category 1, then where the resources was coming from could not have even a microphone. My friends from Angola were there. We went there, and then it was time they installed new equipment, and then they didn't have microphones to work with. So if the independent regulator be able to do its job when they are together, if the leadership would ensure that that is done, then we may not need it. But if it's not working, you don't keep what is not working. You try something new.
Okay, we have a couple of questions, but we want to ask the last one for now. It says that which is the best entities and of which
I don't get a question. Which is the best form of asset sharing between the separating entities, and which one will you recommend going forward? If the government does what it has to do well to determine what are your needs, how did Nigeria determine, for instance, that 56%, initially was 70, but now 56%, that will assess the needs? If the ANS has to buy expensive equipment, etc., that the technical regulator has to agree that it's been done, then the economic regulator comes in to make sure that in the sharing of the assets, the ANS or the regulator will have what it takes to provide the service. So you cannot prescribe a particular way to determine what is required to meet an agreed level of technical performance and at what price. So the technical regulator as well as the economic regulator comes in the asset sharing.
Thank you. Wow, that was awesome. I can confidently say that we've had an insightful conversation today. We keep learning as we grow in our various fields of endeavors. Questions that are not responded to due to time constraint will be answered and emailed to our various participants. Air Traffic Controllers Association, I'd like to say a very big thank you to our speakers for today, Mr. Taylor and Professor Benz, for accepting and making time out of your busy schedules to join us. Not just that, but having shared your insightful thoughts on the subject matter. We don't take it for granted at all. We are indeed grateful. Would like to thank every attendee who made time to join us as well. Keep joining our subsequent webinars as we share industry insights. I would also like to thank GCA management, ATC management, IT section, and the crew for their continuous support. Finally, I would like to thank the president and all members of GATCA, most especially the members of the technical team, Ben, Alisa, Samani, Alaska, Jonah, Oko, and all the team members. Would want to end the webinar with a closing prayer. Father, Lord, we thank you for a successful webinar. Continue to protect and bless the work of our hands. In Jesus' name. All too soon, come to a successful end of another edition of the GATCA Technical Webinar Series. On my own behalf and on behalf of the technical team, we say thank you for joining us until we come your way again. For now, we say bye-bye for now and do have a pleasant weekend. This has been your moderator for the day, Evelyn Oyelamte. Enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.